how's it going? Today I'm going to be doing this class, Herbs to Soothe the Belly, for Vita House here in Berlin. Let's see, I have handouts available on my website that you can print out if you'd like to have them to follow along as I'm talking. The first one is pictures of today's special guest herb, which is plantain. And the other one is an outline of what I'm going to talk about. So, the very first thing on the outline, we'll start with plantain. Start with plantain. Okay. Plantain is a very, very common weed here in Germany and in the northern parts of the United States and all over the world. It's a very common weed in temperate areas. So when I was living in Austin, Texas, we hardly had any of it. I was so excited to have one little plantain plant pop up in my yard in Austin. But so, sometimes people are like, oh, it's a common weed, it grows everywhere. Like, well, even common weeds in one place don't necessarily grow in other climates. But if you're in Germany or if you're anywhere in the northern part of the United States, there's tons of it everywhere. And so I went out and picked some at the park a couple days ago, unfortunately, so it's a little old. But you can see the difference in these two species that are very common here. So this one is called Plantago major. Major means big. This is the one with the big leaves. And this one is lanceolata, which means lance-shaped. So they are both. So this is the black and white version, the color, just to save ink, but if you print out the color version or if you look at the color version on your computer, I wanted to show that it is a rosetting plant, which means it's this strategy we can say that a plant has, even though it's kind of anthropomorphizing. We still talk about it as a reproductive strategy. So what it does is when it sprouts, it goes wide and flat and covers as much ground as it can, so even like this one's been all beat up, but it's sort of like spread out and it's trying to claim this space. And then what that does for them is they don't have competition in the root zone right around them, and they have all the sunlight in that little area. And so a lot of plants that rosette, what they'll do is they will actually sprout in the fall, and then they'll just sit there all winter, and then as soon as the conditions are right, they'll sort of look like they just came to life, and they'll grow a lot, and they just have an advantage on the plants that have to start from seed in the spring. So it's one of those. So you'll see these rosettes. And it's a plant that can tolerate a lot of mowing and being walked on and so forth. So it's very common. You'll see it everywhere, in parks and in really scrubby kind of areas. So I thought it's a good one to talk about just because it's very easy to get to know it and to start to recognize it. Because I think part of getting to know plants is to sort of learn to recognize them in different contexts. The same way that like somebody really well, they can be wearing a costume, or you can see them completely out of context and you still recognize them. So plantain is one where you can kind of sort of train your eye for recognizing plants by noticing, oh, that's plantain growing in a different circumstance, because it'll grow differently depending on how much space it's got, how much water it has, how much shade it has, and also how much it's been mowed and so forth. So it can look kind of different at different times. But so this one up here it's not so impressive in black and white, but if you look at the color photo, it's this sort of pink, purple, fairy, adorable flower. This is actually Plantain media, so it's the medium size that's kind of halfway between. And I took this picture in the Rhine Valley near the Abbey of St. Hildegard, and it's just to show you how cool that flower is. I feel like I'm gonna get backwards, but no, I'm not. The wide one, the Plantago Major, they're all in this family Plantaginaceae. So it's basically, it is the plantain family is what the family's called. In German, this one is Breitwegerich, so wide plantain. It's funny because, it has like little flowers, seeds all up and down the stem. And media is sort of in between. And then the Plantago lanceolata has just a little spike at the very top. And it tastes kind of mushroomy. You can harvest those flower tops if you want. And the whole plant's edible. It's a completely edible, safe plant. So yeah, I think that's most of what I wanted to show you about it visually. You're probably very familiar with it. I grew up in the north in the United States, and it grew everywhere. And I feel like I know this plant so well because I used to just pick it apart while I don't know. It's an easy plant to pick apart, and it has little threads in it, and has, I don't know. You're probably very familiar with it. So, in general, I think of this wider, flatter one as being the one that I would prefer for external applications, like for skin, and sort of my mnemonic is I imagine it being like big and wide and flat and being on my skin. And the lanceolata is more typically used internally for the digestive tract, and I think of that as being, long and skinny like the digestive tract. But they both work for both. It's not that big of a deal which one you're using. They're very similar, really. So I'd be careful about harvesting these in the city because obviously they get walked on and dogs pee on them and all that kind of thing. But if you can either get it out of a garden, or most gardeners would be glad for you to take it, or you can just order it or whatever. But anyway, it's a plant that you can kind of get to know in person and get to know as a medicine. So what do we use it for? It's cool because it combines, like on the one hand, it's sort of like very gentle and safe, and then on the other hand, it does a lot of the basic things that herbs do. By that I mean, it is both astringent and demulcent. Astringency is that property of tightening tissues, which can restore function if the tissues have gotten too loose. So I think like a example of that would be, that's really easy to visualize, I think, is sunburn, where it's like the damage to the skin has made it sort of like red and a little bit soft in a way, and you're astringent and it sort of tightens and not, that doesn't sound all that appealing, does it? Anyway, astringency tightens things and restores function, whereas demulcency is the sliminess that creates a like a coat of slime on the surface, which is how all of our mucous membranes should be, right? They're supposed to be lined with slime. So if you've got a cut or a scrape or a bug bite or sunburn or nettle sting or anything like that, you can do a spit poultice, you chew it up and put it on there, but you can do any kind of external application. It's a very good external first aid herb. A nice herbal word for that is vulnerary, a wound healing herb externally. And a lot of why we would use it internally is very similar. So the digestive tract is skin, right? I mean, we have this image that our bodies are like a donut, you know, and so the digestive tract is really the whole of the donut. It's still external to our body. Even though it seems like when you put things in your mouth that they're going into your body, they're actually going through your body. And then there's all this skin that's in contact with everything that's going through, and very selectively brings things through that wall. But really anything that's in the digestive tract is outside of the body. Yeah? So that skin is a very particular kind of skin, of course. It's this mucous membrane that, just like the inside of your mouth, is very pink and soft and wet all the way through, right? And so, and there's more of that skin on the inside than there is on the outside. It's a lot of surface area. So just like the skin on the outside of your body, that skin can get injuries and irritations and so forth. And so one of the ways that herbs can be really helpful in digestion, in the digestive tract, is basically as topical remedies, like the same kinds of things that you would use on your skin, but you're using them on that skin that lines the inside of your digestive tract. So I think plantain is just a really great example of an herb that we're using it internally largely because of its effects as an external healer, even though it's on the inside. Besides that, it's very, very nutrient dense, a lot of minerals, and it's a superfood, put it that way. And so those kinds of plants, like nettles and all the things that we would call nutritive herbs, they are going to help digestion at a different level, right? So it's like by providing all of the nutrition that your body needs in order to make all the enzymes, in order to do all the detoxifying and so forth, it's going to reduce sensitivity, allergy, and including food sensitivities, and help with assimilation. So, welcome plantain to our class today. Now, I am moving on to the outline. And I'm starting out very general. Why is good digestion so important to health? From a certain perspective, you could say it's kind of the central task of the body, right? I think this is right, that it requires about 60% of the body's energy to do the digesting. And if we can improve, so I think it's so common when talking about nutrition and diet to talk about what people eat, which is obviously very important. But one of the ways that herbs can be so useful is that they can improve absorption, assimilation, and elimination of the food. So what does that mean? Absorption means like the nutrient comes in, but how well are you actually pulling it into the body? Assimilation, how well are you actually incorporating it into the processes of the body? And elimination, at the end of the digestive process, how effectively are you removing waste products from the body? So we can really tune up all of these aspects of the digestive process. I think it can be a little frustrating when you're trying really hard to eat well, but somehow you're not absorbing well, or you're not assimilating well, or you're not eliminating well. So that's what I am going to focus on today. All right, Next section is lifestyle tips. I tried to keep this as short as possible, but I, got some things to say about this. Sort of my big meta advice would be just this, what do you call it, like mindfulness or self-awareness, that when you are sitting down to eat something, that you just ask yourself, if I eat this, how will I feel in half an hour? And I notice, I think that this is something I just kind of started doing spontaneously. I think I noticed at some point, oh, if I eat this, I'm gonna feel bad. And then I started doing it more consciously and intentionally. And it's the sort of thing where you can really cultivate your ability to anticipate and I think to some extent really tap into a more intuitive level of your body that has this knowledge that you might not realize you have. But with a lot of people, when I've asked them, how will you feel after you eat that, they don't know, and they are kind of daunted by it. But I think if you just start trying, just start asking, and then maybe afterwards just like, oh, I got that right, I got that wrong. Just to cultivate that consciousness can be completely transformative in and of itself without any other system. And just cultivating this ability to know, how am I gonna feel after I eat this? I would encourage that, especially if you're having problems. And you might notice, like I notice there's some things that if I eat it in the morning, it's not gonna go so well, but if I eat it later in the day, it's okay. Your body, each body's different, so check in. That was my first lifestyle tip. The second one is eat on a schedule. So the digestive process is many steps. It's pretty complex, and I don't advocate any one particular schedule. There's a lot of different cultural variations, and different health systems have different ideas about this. But I think what is important is a schedule, because if your body knows at this time of day, I typically eat this, it's usually about this quantity, it's usually these kinds of proportions, then it's got all of the digestive juices ready. Everything's, it's ready when it's needed. If you're eating at, random amounts, random things at random times, it's just going to be harder for your body to respond smoothly. So, especially if you're having digestive problems, just kind of, figure out an eating schedule that works well for you, and try to use that, use rhythm, use timing, and as a way to have some momentum for your digestion. That can be very, very helpful. Third tip about eating is to focus on variety, and variety. When I was taking nutrition class in college, and it's like the big textbook that's American Dietetic Association, and very standard practice, and regular mainstream nutritional advice, nutritional science. Number one in there was variety, and I think I really wanted to talk about it in this class specifically, because I think that the people watching this are going to be people who are particularly into natural healing and nutrition and so forth, and that it's really easy to get into this mindset where you think, okay, blueberries are the most nutritious fruit, and kale is the most nutritious green, and then to just eat kale and just eat blueberries rather than eating a wide variety of berries and a wide variety of greens. And I think, I know it's science, it's a fact. You should aim to be eating as wide a variety of different plants as possible. And to minimize how much of you're eating of any one thing, because there's a couple of reasons for this. One is just sort of statistical, that if you take an average of a bunch of different foods, you're much more likely to get closer to your nutritional needs than if you lean too heavily on a few foods. And then part of it is also a little more complicated, but basically, if you eat, it has to do with gut bacteria. It's complicated. I'm not actually going to go into that tangent, but I'll just say if you eat too much of one food can kind of wipe out your gut bacteria in one aspect, and make more vulnerability in the gut. If you eat a wide variety of things, you're kind of nothing's gonna sort of get through the defenses and damage the gut wall. It's kind of oversimplified, but that's okay. So yeah, eat a variety of foods. The fourth lifestyle tip about digestion is eat your water. So this is based on, a couple things here. I noticed in practice as an herbalist that a lot of people who are coming to me with digestive problems were eating an extremely dry diet and then a lot of water and drinking a lot of water. And it doesn't work as well as eating wetter food. It just doesn't. So a lot of this would be people eating things like those like bars that are really dry, or just like eating like nuts and drinking water, and you know that's fine as part of your diet, but this is such a great example of how science can get really reported in a really odd way in news media, popular media. A study that that little factoid that you hear all the time, that you should drink 8-ounce glasses of water a day, right? That came from a scientific study in the first place. And I was listening to an interview with the head researcher on that paper, and he was saying, it was the 10-year anniversary of the publication of that paper. And he was saying that it was so weird for him because the sentence in the paper is that they recommend 8-ounce servings of water per day, comma, half of which should be from food. And somehow they just cut off the part after the comma in the news media. They specifically said in that original paper that gave that specific number that half of that should be from food. So, somehow that went missing, and it gets, how internet nutritional information just becomes this echo chamber sometimes, and it just became 8-ounce servings of water. The other part is half of which should be in your food. So it's very important that at least 4 of your 8-ounce servings of water are coming from whatever, like pasta and rice, and fruits and vegetables and tea and so forth. Okay. So, especially if you're having problems with water balance, say, check on that. Make sure that you're not eating too dry of a diet. Okay. Then, of course, the last lifestyle tip, use herbs. Here we go. Next section, the ways to use herbs for digestion. All of these are going to be internal uses that I'm talking about here. So the first one is in your food. So when you are making whatever food, pretty much all these different things that we add for flavor as seasonings, they also have, they're basically superfoods, They have all these phytochemicals, and so without worrying about it too much, what's for what, I just encourage you, use more paprika, use more turmeric, use more thyme. All of these things are just adding more phytonutrients, more plant molecules to your diet, So, yeah, just in general, use more herbs in your cooking. Drink teas instead of water sometime, whatever. So other ways that if you want to use herbs for your digestion, vinegars. You can extract herbs into vinegars and then use the vinegar in any way you would want to use in cooking, or you can mix it with water and drink it. If you like sour things, it can be really good. You can use honeys. You can extract herbs into honey and then have an herbal honey. Those are nice. You can even you can take that and like add some coconut flour, but you can use different things and make like little balls and have sort of like somewhere between a candy and a pill, made of herbs. That's something that I've liked to do, especially that can be really nice for sort of digestive herbs, carminative herbs, which I'll get to in a minute, like things that taste good, like cardamom. It's really nice that way. Teas, of course, there's a zillion different ways to make teas, and you can use tinctures for herbs for digestion, and bitter blends, or blends of bitters. So this is sort of this whole category of in gastronomy, right? You have aperitifs and digestifs, and these are alcohol-based herbal medicines, basically. And yeah, I mean, all of them. It's like you go to a liquor store and there's all these bitter herbs. I'm going to talk in a second about what bitter does with your digestion, but that these liqueurs, like you can use them with intention for your digestion. So I'm going to talk about Jagermeister, which I think is really funny. I read once, somebody said that one of the most brilliant advertisers was the guy who took Jagermeister, which was used by old people in Germany for their digestion, and made it into something that frat boys drink in the United States, which is really a remarkable feat, I had because Jagermeister, it's got the aromatics and bitters that I'm going to talk about in a minute. It relieves gas and a feeling of bloating, and encourages digestion, stronger digestion. So I had a friend, she was from Brazil, and we were friends here in Berlin, and it was funny. She said she had this German boyfriend, and she would go out with him, and he and his friends they drink beer all night and eat sausages and eat fries, and she's like, she would just feel bloated and have gas, and her digestion would be off afterwards. And she said, I don't understand how they do it. How do they eat like this? And I said, well, do they order rounds of Jagermeister shots? And she said, yeah. And I said, do you drink the Jaeger? She said, no. Said, you have to take your medicine, And I think it's funny, I'll see that a lot here in Berlin. I have a whole photo album on Facebook of photographs I've taken on the street of people's abandoned Jaeger bottles, and also Pfeffi or Berliner Luft, these peppermint schnapps, and like all these different bitter herb combinations. They are very, if you don't already use them, they're very effective for digestion. It's how people can eat a diet of basically meat and fried potatoes and beer and pretzels and have their digestion still function. Really works. So man, another story like that. I went to a beer garden, Pratergarten, here in Berlin with my brother, and I've lived here for 5 years. I've kind of lost touch sometimes of like, do we do this in America, or is this, I lose track. I was sitting with him at this beer garden, and these guys at the next table, they were like, like working class German dudes, like drinking a lot of beers, and they had a bottle of peppermint schnapps on the table, and it was like between rounds of beers, they were doing shots of peppermint schnapps. I said, do we do that in the States? He said, no, we do not do that in the States. But so I think it's funny that like this use of digestive herbs in the beer drinking culture in Germany is pretty integrated into the culture, which I think is pretty cool. So next I'm going to talk about categories of herbs to consider for digestion. The first one is fiber. And I know that seems a little weird, like, wait, is that an herbal property? But fiber comes from plants. And somehow, like, there's such a tendency to want to extract everything and to, make it like more intense and narrow it down. And when we do that, some of the first things we remove are the water and the fiber. These are two of the most important things for digestion. So, when you think about, holism and whole foods, I want to encourage you to think about using whole fruits, whole leaves, rather than always trying to extract and get rid of these things that are so important to digestion, right? So fiber, when we talk about dietary fiber, this is a functional category, functional definition that means dietary fibers are things that human digestion doesn't touch. So that means that I put it in my mouth, my body does not act on it, right? Now there's a distinction. There's insoluble fiber and soluble fiber. Insoluble fiber is not water soluble, and not a whole lot is going to happen to it while it's inside my body. It is going to leave my body pretty much the same way it came in. So like corn is a pretty clear example of that, right? That's some insoluble fiber in the little skin that's on the surface of those corn kernels, okay? And the reason that is so important is that adds volume, so that there's something that, like, it's like this raft, so that the things that need to leave your body have something to ride out on. So insoluble fiber is very, very important in that way. Soluble fibers, on the other hand, are water soluble, so they're going to be more like gel than like sort of skins and that sort of thing. And so some foods that are particularly high in soluble fiber include apples, beans, onions, oats. These are these kinds of things that get a little slimy, right? And the reason that these things are so important is that, we don't absorb them, but the bacteria that live in our guts, that's what they eat. That's their food, okay? So I'm sure you've all heard a lot about the gut microbiome and the bacteria that live in your gut and so forth. And people will talk a lot about eating things that have those organisms in them. But what's really, really important to your digestive health in the long term is to make sure that you're feeding the bacteria in your gut, and you do that with the soluble fiber. One of the most transformational things I ever did for my own digestion was I decided every time I feed myself, I'm also going to feed my gut bacteria. And after 2 weeks, it was like everything in my life had changed. It was phenomenal. And I mean, this could be a really good thing to try in your diet if you're having a hard time with digestive issues. And that this, like I said, this is like oats, beans, apples, cabbage, things like this. If you just, whenever you have a meal, make sure there's one of these things in there, then you know that your gut bacteria, and you think about, these are single cell organisms, right? It's like if you go for a day or two without eating any soluble fiber, they're gonna start to die, right? And then everything gets all complicated. It's better to just feed them all the time, and don't worry. You don't have to worry about like getting more beneficial bacteria in your body if you do a good job of taking care of the ones that you have. Then I think it depends partly on your body type, your digestive type, but rather than focusing on fermenting food outside the body, this is the idea of taking a fresh food and letting it ferment in your gut and feeding the bacteria that are already in your gut. So that's fiber. The next category of herbs in my list here is bitter herbs. Now, bitter. Bitter is a flavor that we have systematically removed from our civilized foods. You know, even if you take some of the foods we eat commonly, like eggplant or cucumbers or radicchio, and people, you'll see in a cookbook, like to remove bitterness. And you're just like, it's not that bitter. What are they talking about? That's because plant breeders have been systematically removing bitter from our foods so actively that a lot of these bitter foods aren't even bitter anymore. And bitter is a really important stimulating effect for our digestive system. So, not effect, trigger, you know, it encourages our digestion to turn on and be active. Like, there's sort of a theory that maybe it's because some poisonous things are bitter, and so our body wants to really make sure to break it down because it might be poison. Maybe that's it. That's kind of anthropomorphizing, but so here's the thing. All right, I think I'm just going to explain a little bit of physiology right now. I think is one of the coolest things in the body. So we've got, and you know, okay. And part of why I want to talk about this is here's so much about this idea of like doing cleanses, right? And I think sometimes there's a sort of idea there that like the body is dirty and I want to clean it and make it pure. But the thing is, like, it's part of the process of the body working and being alive and just existing in time that there are waste products being constantly generated. It's just how it is. There's no perfect moment of purity, right? There's always going to be processes happening. One of these processes is that we are always creating more red blood cells, which are these little, they're not really whole cells, they're cell fragments. All they do is just grab oxygen and release oxygen, right? They're the red part of the blood, and a little bit of carbon dioxide, but mostly oxygen. They just carry hemoglobin around and they just do. And they don't live very long. They live an average of like 4 days or something. And they have no ability to repair themselves. Once they're worn out, they're worn out. My teacher Michael used to say that they're like nails, and then the nail gets bent and it doesn't work anymore. So, and they're like that. They're just like this sort of little replaceable thing, you know. Constantly get a bunch of them, and you constantly are getting rid of a bunch of them. So I just think this is like the coolest sort of composting, recycling system that in our body. Your body puts those all in the gallbladder with a bunch of other stuff, and then uses them kind of like soap to break down fat into smaller molecules so that then you can absorb it. So cool. So instead of just getting rid of it as a waste product, it uses it another time. So what happens is you eat something with some fat in it, and then some bile gets released like soap, and that helps that fat get absorbed into your body. That's the absorption part of digestion. And then if there's enough fiber in the diet, then that bile is going to get sort of stuck in the raft and it's going to get taken out of your body, right? If there's no fiber in your diet, it'll just keep recirculating, and your bile will get grosser and grosser and so forth. So you need the bitter you need the fat in order to make your body want to release any bile at all. You need the bitter in order to push it a little bit harder, and then you need the fiber to carry it out. So it's sort of a complex process, but when it's all working together, then you have this constant detoxification going on. That makes sense. That's like every day, right? It's not like doing a fast. It's like this is just one of the processes happening in your body all the time. So bitters can really encourage that. And it's pretty simple. So anything that tastes bitter is gonna work. Carminatives is a cool category. So these are basically the things that are high in essential oils, really. And these are all the things we use as herbs and spices, because that's what it is that is so appealing to us about them. So I think, so it's like cardamom and thyme and cinnamon and all these things, right? All the things that you can get an essential oil of it, basically. So these things, what they do, when these essential oils are coming in contact with the surface of your gut lining, they relax it. So the carminatives are very, very helpful for flatulence. When just, you have that full feeling, if you can sort of feel that these gases are pressing against the surface of your gut wall, then carminatives. And this is one of these things where I sort of learned this about herbs. Does that really work? But it really does. It's pretty amazing when you realize, like, oh, I have this full feeling, and it takes something with the carminatives, and sometimes it takes like 2 or 3 doses, but it's powerfully effective. Jaeger. A lot of carminatives in there. Astringents, I've already talked about. This is tightening. We talk often about like things like rose water or witch hazel to sort of tighten the skin. Same idea, but internally we want to make sure that the skin of our gut is working well. So astringents can be really helpful, especially like if somebody's just had diarrhea, and just when things are just like annoyed and you want to sort of bring it back together. Astringents. If somebody's just had diarrhea, a cup of black tea is really gonna help. There's an example of that, using that action. Demulcents are slimy things. Most Europeans and Americans do not like the slimy texture very much in their food. It's just not very common. In the South, in the United States, people eat a lot more okra. That's an example of a demulcent food, because this is a quality that it could be in your food. It's just not the sort of thing that I grew up in the North, in the States. I don't eat much slimy food at all, right? But your mucous membranes need to have mucus in order to function properly. It is both a protective layer that's just protecting from air or food or anything that would be coming directly in contact, but it's also, the mucous membranes are where a lot of the surface immunity is, right? So that's where the white blood cells, that sort of traveling immune cells, and other immune cells are able to have contact with the outside world and kind of check what's going on out there, right? And so if there's anything that's invading, or even if they're just sort of patrolling, they kind of need that layer to swim in. And then they need that layer also if they do need to take some action. So a lot of what they're doing is they're either engulfing something that's a threat, or they have to move towards something that's a threat, or they do a sort of little chemical warfare where they put out a chemical that hurts the whatever it is they're trying to get rid of. They need that watery surface in order to do any of those functions. So we can always encourage surface immunity and the functionality of the gut and all the mucous membranes by using demulcent herbs. They have some kind of, it's interesting, they have, nobody knows how this works. It's not just me. I mean, I've tried to research this. Nobody knows how it works. There's some sort of reflex action that happens here where demulcent herbs help your body create a mucus layer in all of your mucous membranes. It can be very distinctly noticeable. So this is probably, I would say, then if somebody has chronic gut problems, probably the number one category I would start with start considering. The next category I have on here is vulneraries or topical healers. And I know I already said this, but I kind of want to re-emphasize it. I always think of this, people always laugh when I say this, but it's completely sincere. If you think, just like imagine you had scraped your arm. We all have experience with we've scraped ourselves, cut ourselves, right? We've had scabs, we've watched it heal. We know like, oh, it's gonna be pink. And we have a lot of previous experiential knowledge about wounds on our skin, right? You imagine now, what if you take whatever foods, we could, take some oatmeal or some black tea and rub it on your skin, it's fine, right? And if your skin's totally healthy and fine, you could pour soda on there, you could rub it with a burger and some fries, it'd be fine, right? Well now, imagine it's all scraped up. Imagine these same kinds of things you might use in a facial mask, right? Like chamomile and black tea, or oatmeal or apple or whatever. That would probably be soothing, right? It would probably help it heal. But if you just imagine, like put some French fries on your scrape, that's not gonna help. It's not gonna help, right? And so, if you feel like your gut is somewhat injured, to kind of think that the food you're eating is kind of like putting on a mask, kind of like putting on a poultice, right? Because you can really eat in a way that's basically poulticing, right? Like using topical herbs. So that's why I want to talk about vulneraries, because you can do that for a few days. Just have like, if you feel like, man, my gut is really torn up, like maybe you had drank too much, way too much, and had a massive hangover and your digestion is just a wreck. You can think of it this way, like maybe some applesauce, maybe some oatmeal, maybe some black tea, and you're actually healing the surface. Plantain would be perfect, right? So these are these topical healers. And then of course, nutritive herbs. And so, all right, what I want to say about using nutritive herbs to soothe the belly for digestion is that digestion, there's so many different enzymes and digestive juices and all this different stuff. Like if your body's not able to make these things or deliver these things properly, then everything can go crazy, right? And so, for example, I think magnesium is in 300 different enzymes that your body produces. So using herbs like nettles and plantain that are just have a huge amount of nutrition. It's like taking your vitamins and minerals. Those kinds of herbs can be very helpful in making sure that your body's able to sort of do what it wants to do digestively. I really notice in my own body, for example, I tend toward like histamine intolerance. And if I make sure to have these, and that relates to all kinds of little allergic things, right? Like eczema and hay fever, like pollen allergies, all that stuff. Like it can kind of get more allergic to everything. Things like nettles and plantain and oat straw that are just, providing just a ton of nutrition, help your body be able to handle this, the immune stuff, the allergy stuff a lot better, a lot more smoothly. So, yeah, and I mean, really with herbalism, you always want to make sure you're filling in any nutritional deficiencies, because, if you don't have the parts, you can't make the thing, right? You need all the building blocks. Now, the last section, classic herbs for digestion. There's so many, I kind of had to pick and choose. I mostly selected some that sort of open up into another smaller topic, right? The first one I have on here is black pepper. Really what I want to get at with that is these sort of, these high essential oil type of, seasoning things, but also this, with black pepper, you're really getting into sort of counter irritation, which is this, also red pepper and all the different kinds of peppers, really all these like spicy things, and that's gonna stimulate the surface skin to have to react. You're sort of gonna get a response, and so for that reason, it sort of wakes up the digestion, and this can really help with that assimilation aspect. So you have. This is part of why we put these things in our food all the time, right? You can have the exact same meal, but you've put just a little bit on it, and then that's gonna kind of wake up your digestion to do more. That's how I think of it. So you can, and it depends. I mean, if you're like I said, at the very, very beginning of talking about all this, I said, pay attention to how are you going to feel in a half hour. If your digestion is so sensitive right now that a little bit of black pepper is going to upset it, but don't use it. But I'm just giving you this idea that if you want to sort of like increase the digestive fire, is a way that it's put sometimes. If your digestion's too slow and sluggish and it feels like it's just not going forward, these kinds of pick me up kind of herbs, that sort of. So, black pepper, I would think of that way. The next one on here is burdock. This is a personal favorite of mine. It's bitter, a little bit bitter. It is a little bit laxative, not very, a little bit. It's also, what do you call that? Diuretic. It'll encourage you to pee more. So I wanted to talk about this one specifically, is this idea of opening the channels of elimination, is the way that herbalists will typically put it. And this is this idea that I always think of it like if you had to clean up like a really messy, cluttered apartment, and you walk in, what's the first thing you would do? To me, the first thing I would do is take out the trash in the trash can, so you have space in the trash cans to put more trash into, right? It's kind of the idea. Like, it's not like worry a whole lot about what's going on inside the body until we've established that everything that wants to get out of the body can get out. So that's, pooping and peeing, and it's also sweating freely and breathing. So some physical activity that's gonna help you expel through the lungs and expel through the skin. But burdock is really gonna help with making sure that the urine and feces are getting out. You wanna make sure you're doing that. Yeah. The next thing that I have on this list is carob. I want to back up and say, you know, burdock also points to that relationship between skin and digestion. Burdock I think of as being, it's very related to skin eruptions. And, you know, this is the sort of thing where, you know, you'll see a lot in sort of in standard practice medicine. They'll say, oh, there's no relationship between what you eat and acne. Just, yeah, obviously there is though, right? I mean, there is. And so burdock is often thought of as a skin clearing herb, and it definitely, it works that way. If I have a zit, I usually go straight to burdock. But I think, you know, the reason it's working is because it's helping the digestion, and that's most of how we are detoxifying the body, is through our digestive system. So it's maybe it's a step away, but burdock I think shows that sort of, you know, the relationship between how the way that good digestion is going to help clarify the skin. Carob. This is one thing so here is some carob powder that I got at the health food store, and I love carob, and I want to, you know, proselytize on its behalf. I think it is a terrible, horrible thing that people have done to try to make fake chocolate bars out of carob. It's just stupid. They're not very similar. They're both brown powders. That's what they have in common. Chocolate is horribly bitter. If you try to mix a spoonful of chocolate, just plain chocolate with no sugar or anything, into a glass of water and drink it, it would be disgusting. This would be delicious because carob is sweet. It doesn't have that intense bitter flavor like chocolate. Carob is it's really lovely, and it is nutritive. It's very nutritious. It is a legume, and so if you this is my number one remedy for diarrhea. I'm gonna back up. Okay, diarrhea, if it's because of some kind of, you know, bacteria, something bad is in there and your body's trying to get it out, then I would go to activated charcoal, which the activated means they did some process to it. I think it involves heat, but basically it made it so that that charcoal has a ridiculous amount of surface area. It's like it's bigger on the inside, kind of a thing. What that means is that it absorbs a ridiculous amount of stuff in the gut and then carries it out. And so if what you're really trying to do is just like grab everything in your gut and get it out, it's helpful. I think this trend of black foods, like, it looks cool, sure, but people are using activated charcoal to make food black, and it is anti-nutritious. I mean, it is taking things that you could absorb as nutrition into your body and taking it out of your body. So it doesn't make any sense to me, and I would not recommend eating charcoal containing black foods on a regular basis. It's a very weird trend. Carob, on the other hand, is soothing and nutritious for your gut. And so if it's a situation where the diarrhea is because the gut lining is irritated, or because you're nervous or something like that, if it's, you know, if you think it's not like a toxic kind of diarrhea, it's like a either nervous, or especially if it's the gut is irritated and the lining of the gut might be irritated, carob's really nice because it's soothing and very nutritious, and so you're gonna be like feeding the gut instead of just taking everything out of it. So carob, I will often bring it with me if I'm traveling because it's powder. It's really light and easy to transport, and then just mix it with some water. It's very helpful. The next one I have on my list here is flaxseed. Flaxseed is really cool because along with, let's see, chia seed, basil seed, some seeds have this, on the seed coat, they have a mucilage that, so the reason it's there is so that when it rains, then the seed has like basically a little drop of water that's inside of, and then that can slowly release, and then the seed can germinate. So for us, it's demulcent. It's mucilage that's gonna moisten all of our mucous membranes. Now, all of these seeds, the inner part has nutrition as well, but and they are also bulk laxatives, so they are insoluble fibers, so helping to create that raft. So there's the insoluble fiber and soluble fiber in these seeds. They're just can be really, really helpful for digestion. If you're like with so many herbs, it's like, yeah, if you take them at the right moment and the right timing, it can be incredibly powerfully helpful. Ginger is the next one I have here. So ginger is another one that's going to be warming to the digestion if the digestion is feeling sluggish or slow, and like you want to just this idea of increasing the digestive fire, because it's like you don't want things to sort of pass through you undigested. You want to make sure that your body is really getting as much out of it as it can. And so sometimes you need to kind of stoke the fire to get it to get your digestion to be working more efficiently. Ginger's good for that, and it is also carminative, so it'll help with the bloating and that kind of thing. It can be really nice. Marshmallow is the next one. Is kind of an archetypal demulcent. So, as my teacher used to say, a slimer. So this is again with this idea of with mucus, right? That you want to have a good mucus lining in the gut, and so. Marshmallow, for gut healing, if you have sort of chronic gut problems and you want to do a good long course of gut healing, you can do marshmallow. It doesn't have a whole lot of flavor, right? So you can make some marshmallow tea and mix it with your water for the day, so that you always have a little bit. That's one good way to do marshmallow. And you can, of course, you can mix all these herbs together. You can use marshmallow root is really a classic. You can also use mallow leaf, and it's going to be milder, and you can use that a lot too. I mean, there's so many other demulcents, but that's just kind of the very, very classic one. The next one on here is peppermint, and this is so classic, right? It's very classic carminative to relieve bloating and flatulence and it's just tension in the gut, and to stimulate digestion a little bit. I mean, you could use so many other things, but I want to put that on there just because it's so classic, to remind you, like, oh yeah, sometimes that most incredibly classic thing, like the Pfeffi, the Berliner Luft, peppermint schnapps, totally classic. Plantain, we've already discussed, and to put it back in context, it has the demulcent, vulnerary, and nutritive, I would say, are it's the main reasons why it's going to be so useful as a gut healing herb. And you can, it doesn't have a whole lot of flavor, maybe a little minty, a little bit, but you can use that as a base for an herb blend that you're going to use long-term for gut healing, like I just said with marshmallow too. Rose is an interesting one in this context. So this is a kind of interesting tangent. The gut bacteria, I'm going to say this in a really oversimplified way. Sorry, to anybody who knows more detail about this stuff, yes, this is very oversimplified. But basically, the bacteria in your gut, we can basically think of them as sometimes they're happier than at other times, right? And if they are happier, then they are going to be sending sort of happier messages to our gut brain, right? And if they are more upset, we're not going to feel so good. Like our emotions are not going to feel that great. Our digestive process isn't going to work as well. So from what I've read, 2 herbs that are kind of the most effective at making the gut bacteria feel happier, so to say, are rose and green tea. And I find this really fascinating because these are 2 herbs that are commonly thought of as helping us feel peaceful. Associate green tea with meditation, with sort of feeling calm, and rose is that same way. And then I wonder, on a biological level, how much of that is because of what these herbs are doing to our human cells, and how much of that is what they're actually doing to our gut bacteria cells, and then our gut bacteria is sending messages that we're receiving. I don't know. It's interesting though, isn't it? So I wanted to put rose on here to give that idea that, of course, there's a gazillion different reasons to use. So rose is astringent. It's also got that carminative. It's got the essential oils and so forth. So it makes sense as a topical healer. It's got some nutrition in it. It's got some bitters. So it's So it has all these other things that a lot of other herbs have. But I also think of it as very specifically trying to help the gut bacteria feel happier, help them feel loved. Yeah. Okay. The next one is yarrow. That is an herb that I used to think of it almost entirely as an external healer. I don't know why. I got that in my head early. But I wanted to make sure to put it on the list to say, you can absolutely use it as a tea. And these properties it has of styptic, so it stops bleeding. If there are any little tears in your gut lining, like if you feel like your gut is all torn up, might not hurt, to use these sort of topical healers, the kinds of things you would use on scrapes and stings, and just try to heal up that lining of the gut. Yarrow is definitely something I would think of. My teacher Michael's kind of main thing he would say about yarrow is that it helps put the fluids in their places. So if the blood is in the wrong place, or the lymph is in the wrong place, or it's very vague, but it makes sense at some level. So yarrow is also bitter. It's also very bitter, and so it's a nice kind of 1-2 combination, right? So it's going to help with the healing of the lining of the gut, but then it's also going to stimulate the release of bile, and so that helps everything flow better. Detoxifying, right? The last herb that I have on the list here is yellow dock, and I guess this is one that's very sort of herbal, you know, it's like, I mean, it's in a lot of herb books, but it's not something that I think the sort of general public is very familiar with. And yet, it grows all over the place. It's a very common weed. If you look it up and keep an eye out for it, you'll see it at the park. It's pretty common. What's really interesting about yellow dock is that okay, so there's a category of herbs that are called alteratives, as in alter, that they alter the physiologic processes, which I know is very vague. And so other herbs that I definitely think of in this category would be burdock and nettles and red clover, and again, this is a functional category. We're talking about something that they do. It's not like a property of the herbs themselves. It's a relationship with what they do when they're in the human body. So alternatives are generally herbs that we use to try to increase the basically the nutrition that people are getting from the same food, right? So in yellow dock, it's very specific about iron, that it's not that yellow dock contains iron. It's not that. It's that if you are taking yellow dock in conjunction with foods that contain iron, your body will uptake more of it. So like molasses has iron in it. If you just take the molasses, you'll get so much iron. If you just take yellow dock, your iron's not gonna really go up. But if you take them both together, you're gonna somehow, and this is another one of these things that people don't know how, but it works, you will get more iron into your body from the molasses if you are using yellow dock. So alternatives is a little bit of a complex category, but I just wanted to at least introduce that idea that that's part of why. I mean, we think of these like, you know, really complex blends of the aperitif, digestif, these kinds of liqueurs that contain, you know, whatever, 83 different herbs or whatever, that they can be having these kinds of effects, that not only are they relieving gas, relieving constipation, this kind of thing, reducing allergic response, but also just helping you get more out of the food you eat. And I think especially for those of us who really make an effort to eat well, you know, isn't it nice to know that you're getting as much out of it as possible, rather than, you know, going through all this effort to, you know, get all this wonderful regional organic food and prepare it really carefully, and then it just passes through your body and you didn't even absorb it. That's kind of a shame, right? And so wanted to bring up yellow dock, and like I said, also, you know, burdock, nettle, red clover, but there's a lot of these herbs that can really help with the actual assimilation. So I think that's it. And you know, all right, the one thing that I wanted to, that I didn't say, that I wanted to make sure to say, this idea, okay, people will sometimes talk about how, about healthy food as if it's unpleasant, you know, and it always strikes me as so odd, this idea that somehow like unhealthy food tastes better and healthy food tastes worse. And this goes back to what I was saying at the very beginning of this, like when you sit down to eat, to think, how's this going to make me feel? And what I have found personally is that when I do that, it sort of, it expands my frame of the pleasure of a meal, if that makes sense. So yeah, there are things where the first thing that came to mind was cotton candy, or candy floss, they call it in the UK, right? Where it's like, it's sponge sugar, it's just sugar, right? And is that experience of putting it in my mouth enjoyable? That weird melty feeling? Yeah, it's interesting, it's cool, I like it. But when I think, how am I gonna feel in a half hour? When I look at the total pain pleasure equation and I make the time frame long enough, it's not worth it. It's not that pleasurable, right? Whereas like, you know, an apple, it's like, well, I know, you know, it tastes good as I'm eating it, and man, I'm gonna feel so much better in a half hour than I would if I had had something else, and I'm gonna feel better tomorrow. And so I kind of don't understand that whole idea that that it's somehow a hardship to eat things that make your body feel good. It's weird, isn't it? It's very strange. So I think that's it. I hope that this is helpful for you, and I know, yeah, it's I guess I mentioned like constipation and diarrhea, but I didn't go into you know, particular disease states, and that's really not how I practice, right? I mean, the kind of herbalism I do is much more like how do we support healthy processes, and how do we support the body in healing itself and you know, doing things well, and then, you know, the symptoms will just float away. That's more how I operate. So I hope that whatever your motivation for watching this, that you find it helpful. All right, thank you for watching, and take care.